Hi, and thanks for joining us. This is tplmedia.ca, tplmedia.ca/local. I'm Mike Wixson. Medical assistance in dying, or MAID, has become one of the most debated public policy issues in Canadian history. Supporters see it as a compassionate choice that gives people dignity and control at the end of life. Critics argue that as eligibility has expanded, so have concerns about safeguards, vulnerable Canadians, disability rights, mental illness, and whether our healthcare system is offering enough support before offering an assisted death. It's a conversation that touches medicine, ethics, law, and the values we hold as a country. Joining us today is author, medical ethicist, and health policy expert Tom Koch, who spent years examining Canada's approach to MAID and asking whether we've struck the right balance between personal autonomy and protecting those most at risk. Tom, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us on this very complex and frankly interesting topic of medical assistance in dying, or MAID as it is known. I appreciate your time on this.
I'm pleased to be here. This is something I've worked on as a caregiver for in my own family, as a researcher, as an investigative reporter. I served as a consultant to Justice Canada in its legal cases, as a researcher, as an ethicist writing about it since the 1980s. So I go back to when we both had hair on our heads.
Hey, you know what? I remember the era specifically. That is a long time to focus on a topic. You must have had caregiving for your dad must have been a real impactful moment in your life.
It was. And afterwards, so many people wrote me. I did a book on other caregivers. I've worked with over 150, 200 families. And in the best of cases, and in many cases, it becomes a positively life-changing event to be the caregiver for somebody for whom you love.
Yeah.
And whether you are a spouse, whether you are a daughter, a granddaughter, and sometimes even a neighbor, the issue of caring unto death becomes an important thing. And as an investigative reporter, when I began to see the way this was being misapplied and misused, I dealt with other cases. That's why in the last year, 2 years ago, I decided to take all of the work I have done since 1996 and put it into a new book, Seeking Medicine's Medical Center, where I could review the cases and where I could say, what have we learned and how do we see all of this as an emotional issue, an ethical issue, and a social issue at once. And we are dealing better with it in some ways than in others.
What ways are we dealing it? And you say from the 80s on, in what ways are we dealing with it better now than we ever have in that experience for you?
One of the things, medical termination, legal medical termination, that's the Dutch term for our polite medical aid in dying. One of the things it has done is it has brought many people in the caring community, the people who reflexively care for their relatives, to the fore, and the idea of caring for people with fragilities as an important thing to do. And we didn't really think about this so much in the 70s or in the early 80s. As our generation, my generation has aged, it's become a little more necessary for some. But what we come down to is, rather than focusing on what they call dying with dignity, let's focus on living with dignity despite restrictions. And until we can assure people the likelihood of living with dignity despite restrictions, providing the care to the caregivers and the person, then we're asking people to play Russian roulette with a loaded revolver. And that is neither ethical nor sensible.
Where do we lose our way on this path between what is good and reasonable and humane and kind and what is defined maybe as not good use of this medical assistance?
We lost our way, I think, in several spots. One of them was ethically, the insistence on autonomy, that everybody can make their own decision, everybody knows what's right for them. I cannot tell you how many times somebody has told me, I would rather die than not be able to drive a car. I would rather die than be able to have a colostomy. I had a German fellow in his 70s, back when I was young, who had a colorectal cancer and needed a colostomy. And he said he didn't want to live like that. He wasn't going to use a bag to go to the bathroom. And his son and his wife and everybody ganged up on him. And he found that if he could put on a cummerbund over his tuxedo and still go to the annual German dances, life was still worth living. I remember another time when I was working in a rehab hospital, and there was a beautiful rehab technician, physical therapist, sort of Nordic-looking woman, blonde, large, rather well-built. And this fellow, Freddie, was wheeled in. We'll call him Freddie. And he had lost his leg just below his knee in a car accident. And Freddie was about 23. And so we'll call her Heidi, said, well, Freddie, you ready to get to work? Oh, he said, screw you. I can't do nothing without my goddamn leg. What do you think I'm going to do? Heidi looked at him and said, okay, take him back. The next day, I was down there again, and they brought Freddie again. Heidi said, Freddie, ready to get to work? Sorry, I can't do nothing you can do to grow my new leg. She said, no. She said, what can you do? Take him back. Well, I got very interested in this, being something of a voyeur. So the next day, it was Friday, comes down, same thing happens. She leans forward, puts her hands on the wheel, on the arms of his wheelchair. She said, Freddie, you're not going to screw anybody if you can't get out of the goddamn chair. Turn back, send him to his room. I was there an hour early Monday to see how this turned out. Monday, Freddie comes down and he says to Heidi, he says, so do we sort of have an agreement?
The will to live.
Heidi leaned forward. She put her hands on his wheelchair, bent right into his face. She said, Cupcake, the only agreement you get is the ability to try. Take him back up to the room. Next day he comes down. She says, well, Freddie, you ready to get to work? He said, yes, ma'am. I learned more from that moment and that woman than in all the ethics courses I went to. We all mourn what we have lost. The life we lived is over. He was not going to become a professional footballer. But when we mourn what we have lost, we need to also look to what we can live with and what we can do with what we have. And often it is as good as or better than what was with care. I did some work with para and quad paraplegics some years ago, and there were studies which showed that in the first 6 months, people with spinal injuries have over 90% suicidal ideation. That is, they don't want to live, especially if they're quadriplegics. And that's pretty serious. I mean, paraplegic is bad enough. Quads is really over 90%. 2 years later, 2/3 of them found that life was equally worth living, if different, and sometimes even a little better. They had to jettison all the things of the life they had had. One was an airplane pilot who I talked to. Well, he wasn't going to fly a plane, basically, as a quad. He had jumped into a swimming pool drunk when there was no water in the swimming pool. But his wife stood by him and his kids. He found another way to work somewhat from his wheelchair. And what he found was that without all the detritus of his life, that the life with his family, the life even with these limits, was still worthwhile and even better.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible in a lifetime, the people that you'll meet. And, I remember a friend saying to me, there is no limit to the amount of pain a person might experience in their life. And that is the truth. But then you think about